welcome to another amazing Gnomon live stream. Insert audience applause right here. Thank you all so much, and thank you for watching at home. Before we begin, if you're looking for closed captions, go ahead and head over to our YouTube or our Facebook page. Next, if you enjoy our content, make sure to like, share, subscribe, tell people about it, because we love trying to bring all this awesome content to you, and the more you share, the more people get to see it, so that's always great. And lastly, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Dell and NVIDIA. Without them, we wouldn't be able to provide you with such amazing content as you're about to see right now. So, it's kind of a somber situation for me today, because this is going to be one of our last live streams here at the stage. And at Gnomon, we've had a lot of amazing and revered presenters grace this stage. We've seen breakdowns, we've seen discussions, we've seen panels and conversations, and more. And while this stage has a very storied history and has seen a series of different presenters, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that tonight's presenter might be one of the most influential presenters that we've ever had. The reason why I say that is because the Shiflett brothers, who also did an amazing stream here at Gnomon, recently tweeted saying that tonight's presenter is one of the current artist sculptors that they look up to the most. And if that's not a great praise, I don't know what is. So tonight our presenter will be exploring their hierarchy of forms concept, while also diving into their journey into the industry, his work experience at ILM, Valve, Facebook, showcasing personal and professional projects such as Star Trek, The Avengers, and CSGO, for all you sweats out there that are probably playing CSGO right now while also watching this stream. So please help me welcome Gio Nakpil.
I should stand up and thank you so much. You pronounced my name correctly. Thank you, first of all. Wanted to thank everyone here who took their time after work, class, life to come here. And most importantly, I wanted to thank Noman, Alex, for having me here and giving me the privilege and honor of talking to you all about something I'm so passionate about, which is sculpture and art. So my name is Gio Nakpil. I'm the head of visual development at Adobe Substance 3D's Evangelism team, headed up by the amazing Wes McDermott. So I want to give Wes a shout out there. And these are my socials. Wes. You probably know his face from all the awesome Substance videos he does. So for this, we have 2 hours with each other tonight, and so I was thinking, since there's a lot of students here, or maybe people wanting to get into 3D, I don't know, but since I've been at it for about 20 plus years, I figured I'd sort of do a fast forward of my career path, just in case there's something useful and informative for anyone who might be thinking about what to do post-school. And then we're going to switch gears to essentially doing a deep dive in sculptural concepts, form, readability, strength and rhythm, and all that fun stuff. But yeah, so career path. Let me just do a background, where I started at. So this is a picture of me from a photo from ILM's farewell card that they gave me when I left. And I was born in the Philippines, and this is me as a kid. But when I got this, it was a very, very touching moment for me, because it was a full circle moment. Because as a kid, a little bit older than this, I've always wanted to work for ILM, and getting this image here with all the characters I've worked on. Let me just time myself so I don't go over. Sorry, I forgot to do that. Do my so essentially, it was I was very touched, and so I pretty much appreciated it so much, because these were the films I was pretty much inspired by, like many people. But these were the films that were really, really formed me as a kid, and really influenced my style and interest. Just the really hardcore, rated R, gory '80s films, right? So my parents, I guess, were too busy dealing about how to provide a better life for their family, so they let me watch this all on my own. But with that concern from my parents, we ended up in Canada. And I was a pretty aimless kid back in Canada, I remember. Growing up there as a teenager, I didn't really know what to do. I had no ambitions whatsoever, which essentially worried my parents. But I got a job at McDonald's, and they figured, and I figured, I'd be there for probably the rest of my career, and I was honestly fine with it. But I was good at it, and I got Employee of the Month. But I always say this, right? Like when I look at all the jobs I've had from McDonald's to where I am now, I would consider McDonald's as funny as it does sound, maybe not, but it was the most formative in terms of teaching me how to deal with stress, how to deal with people, working with people, sometimes both, how to deal with the stress of working with people, and just being in a team, right? So that really put me forth on a path that set me up nicely in my career to this very day. And I do believe that having had that experience at McDonald's was essential. But during my time around in my teens, I was still very much not interested in art. I mean, I was interested before, but it kind of faded. Whatever that fire is in me kind of faded. And then these two films came out, and the thought of ILM came back. It circled back to me. It was gone for a while, and then it was back in my my sight again. And then this thing, this imagery or this sequence from Jurassic Park, I witnessed, and when I left that theater, I decided that I would work for ILM. I haven't thought of ILM up until that time period, but when I saw this film, I pretty much was determined to work there. But how do I go from the suburbs of Toronto all the way to the suburbs of Marin, where ILM was? And the answer was I didn't know. So I just went about with my life. But I did take up a class. Found the cheapest class that I could get, because my goal was really to just work and see how I could get to the point where I'm good enough to work for a place like ILM. I mean, ILM honestly wasn't even my goal, because I thought that was too high of a goal. It's like Mount Everest. I would have been happy just to kind of work for any company that allowed me to slowly get better enough to get to ILM eventually, maybe, this sort of vague dream. So I took this class, but I wasn't really happy with what the professor was giving us. The one on the upper right-hand corner there were the types of assignments that were being given to us, and I was like, this isn't really going to get me anywhere, So I was a little bit obnoxious, I guess, back in those days, so I kind of just cooped myself up in the lab and assigned myself my own assignments that I felt would push me better. I don't recommend any students here doing that here at Nomon, but that's essentially what I did, and I felt myself getting better. I was using 3D Studio Max V1, I believe, and prior to that, 3D Studio Release 4. So just really trying to learn and see what it's all about, what this 3D thing is. I ended up buying a copy of it so that I could just work from home, because my parents got me a computer that I could work with at home instead of being in the lab all day, never seeing me, so I could just be home all day, never being seen. At least I'm home, right? So, but I was in there just experimenting and really being fascinated with the progress that I was experiencing, because now coming from no goals to now having this goal and seeing that palpable improvement that I've not experienced before until this dead set mission that I'm in, it's just kind of addicting. It was just like this drug. I'm sure a lot of you have felt that, where you're putting in the work and you can kind of feel yourself getting better. Well, that was what I was feeling back then. So I was assigning myself a lot of models that I would do, like hard surface and creatures, because back then we didn't really have any of the amazing sculpting 3D apps that we have now. So we were very limited in terms of how complex we could execute on organic models. So I gravitated more towards hard surface back in those days. Like back then, I mean, my goodness, like polygon by polygon, we had to graft to create something like this, right? But at the back of my head, I was also still very much like a creature person. So I would do like a hybrid, always a hybrid, but experimenting with organics, trying to push myself there. But it was around this point where I started building my own website, and thankfully, from there I got noticed and got a job at Bethesda Softworks in Maryland. I mean, that's a very simplified, compressed version of the events, but through building my website, putting myself out there in those early days of not even social media, whatever you call it back in those days, I got noticed. So I was there for about a year or so, and then went back to Canada, tail between my legs, and went back to my parents' place. But I landed a pretty cool gig designing about 200 or so spaceships for a turnstile game called Stars Supernova. So this was pretty cool because they were like, Gio, just design and build it. I'm like, okay, that seems hard, but why not? I'm always up for a challenge. So I tried to really refine my design thinking, because it was like the first project that they asked me to do such a thing for these spaceships. These were done in 3D Studio. So I always appreciated that project because of that fact that I was able to really stretch my design side, because I don't want to just be a modeler, right? I have a lot of ideas and content in my head that only thing I was missing at that point was the experience and the fear to actually allow me to execute on it. And this was that project. So while I was in Canada doing all that stuff, I came across this job posting, because I'm always like looking, right? Like what else can I do? I was very hungry, and like the fire in me was, I wish I still had that. I mean, I was young, but I'm always looking. And so I came across this this job posting from a company, wanting to do a full feature animated film. And back then it was mostly Pixar, DreamWorks that was doing this kind of stuff. So I applied, and again, because I kept up with my website, for whatever reason, since I don't really have any like animated style stuff on my website, they still hired me. So I went Texas bound to work for DNA Productions, and it was a very fun job. I had to learn Lightwave, sub-D modeling. So this was my first foray into the world of sub-D modeling. All hard surface. I wasn't even doing any of the characters. But yeah, trying to do sub-D modeling on like something like the Yokian shell alien there with the teeth, the sharp teeth. All those transitions, I remember, were so hard because you had to keep the surfaces so smooth, right? But again, it was a learning experience. So I was at DNA, just going about my own thing, working on my website. Then I get this email from a person asking me if I'd be interested to apply for a job for a company who's working on a show for ILM. So out of the blue, this opportunity suddenly lands on my lap without any planning on my end from me, because it's like, oh yeah, ILM, I'm never going to work there, like opportunities like that don't just arrive on your lap. I have to work on it. I'm still working on it. Eventually I'm going to send them a reel. And all of a sudden I have this opportunity to interview. So they wanted to interview me. And thankfully, like at that point, I had amassed enough content from my website where you know, they hired me and worked on my first ever film credit outside of Jimmy Neutron, like a non-animated one, was episode 2, you know, a Star Wars film. And, you know, being influenced by Star Wars, it was just such a surreal thing for me. I remember trying to kind of grasp that moment of like Star Wars. My gosh, it just so happened to align with me being at ILM. It's another Star Wars film. But I was hired as a hard surface modeler. You know, I had to learn alias wavefront, fully NURBS modeling, like industrial design style. But that's the thing, like, I had no time to really get scared at that point. I just had to kind of just roll with it. And it really was amazing, or it is amazing what the human mind and body can do out of fear when they just have to learn something on the spot, right? Because if you had asked me to learn alias from scratch, I'd be hemming and hawing, like, oh, it's so hard, it's so different from ZBrush, from Modeler, from whatever. But here I just had to like roll with it, otherwise I'd be out of the job, right? So that's what happened, and you know, it was like my dream come true. But that dream ended because after ILM, or after episode 2 finished, I was laid off. And so, but you know, with every dream ending, another dream opens up. Just so happens that ESC was hiring for the Matrix sequels. So as a side note, the first Matrix was, and still is, perhaps one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, it's the only movie I've seen when it was released 6 times consecutively, like on 6 days. I was just so in awe and affected by it, right? And then now I'm like, holy crap, Star Wars and then Matrix. It's just, there was just, I was just, you know, thinking about it now, it's just such a weird kind of chain of events that the timing was so perfect for me getting into the film industry at that point, you know, perfect for me. But, you know, ILM ended up calling me again. So I jumped ship because Matrix was kind of wrapping up, and so went back to ILM and was there for 11 years. So I'm going to switch a little bit of gears here and just kind of talk about some of the more influential projects for me personally that that helped me, not just in my career at ILM, but just in general. So, and you know, just all in all, it's just some of my favorite projects I've ever been a part of. Pirates of the Caribbean, which was the first ever film at ILM that was done in ZBrush, actually. I remember that time where we were all just like, what is this ZBrush thing? Oh my God, like the fidelity you can put on a model is just amazing. And so when they implemented that in the pipeline, it was just such a game changer, because all of a sudden, the amount of detail that we could start applying on the characters, like, you know, with the barnacles, with just the wrinkles on this wyvern character, which is such a fun character to do. It was just like next level, like we couldn't really pull that off before. And then there was War of the Worlds, which was like winning the lottery, because being a Spielberg fan back as a kid, you know, again, it's like one of those check marks, many check marks. War of the Worlds, Spielberg, check mark. It was like winning the lottery, because like it was his first foray back into sci-fi since E.T., I believe. And it's a horror sci-fi film too, so everyone wanted this asset. And my edge was that I was using Lightwave. I had experience with sub-D modeling, and all the other people at ILM were NURBS modelers. So by default, hey, Gio gets it. And so I'm like, well, you know, that's how the dice rolls, y'all. So yeah, it was just an amazing project for me. I mean, there's a lot that went into this because of the time period that we pulled it off, and I feel like it contributed to maybe some of the decline in the industry in terms of schedule, because a lot of studios looked at this going, well, ILM pulled it off in such a short amount of time, and so I felt like it had a chain reaction effect that compressed all of the schedules since after the show. Like, I noticed we made it successful, but in such a short time, all the shows I was involved in after that like followed the same pattern. So the Mulgrath from Spiderwick, I put this here because this was the first interaction I've ever had with Carlos Huante, who I considered to be my mentor and taught me a lot of the things I'll touch on later about forms and sculpture, how you look at sculpture. But it was, if McDonald's was that sort of benchmark or landmark in terms of prepping me for the industry with stress and all that stuff, this creature is a landmark in terms of my artistic growth, because when this was given to me, I was like, where do I even start? Like, it's a soup of forms, beautiful forms. Like, it's just, like, I wouldn't know where to begin because there's just so many things there. And so, you know, Carlos really broke it down for me and taught me how to see things in a way that is hierarchy-based, right? Hierarchy of forms. What are the biggest forms that are the most important? And on top of that, what are the secondary shapes that define the character? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know, spoilers. I'm going to touch on all that later, so, you know, stick around. But yeah, this was, still is probably I consider to be one of my most important artist experience ever. So, got to supervise the Star Trek film from J.J. Abrams on the character modeling side. Always awesome when you work on something and the movie ends up being good. So this was such a fun movie. I got to work on some of the creatures. This was designed by Neville Page, I remember. And lastly, the Hulk. You know, I mean, nothing else needs to be said on my end. You know, it was an awesome experience. But it was at this time period that I felt that, you know, I wasn't really growing enough at ILM. So I was pretty much looking at the horizon going, well, schedules are getting shorter, like my body's not feeling well because of all the overtime. Things just weren't feeling sustainable, and I was flexing too much of one thing, like characters, anatomy, you know, muscles, whatever, and disregarding a lot of the other things that I felt that I could grow in and contribute with to a company. And so I looked elsewhere, and luckily I found a spot at Valve, another dream company, you know, being a Half-Life fan and the works that they do, and just I was very fascinated by how their work culture sounded. And so when I went there, man, just really had to deprogram a lot of my production kind of mentality. Because with production, a place like ILM or VFX, right, you're a part of a pipeline, and that's a very awesome thing. That's why it works. That's how the machine works. I'm a part of a pipeline, and the goal is to make this thing look as good as I possibly can, right down to the pixel. That is the practice. With Valve, it was like I felt like I had to think like a psychologist, a data analyst, a CEO, just like a business person, because you're thinking about like community, the customers, and really thinking about not doing things because it's cool, but why do you do things? So there's a layer of thinking that I just was not used to. And then on top of all that, you had to be an exceptional artist to do the work, right? So, and thankfully, my time there too coincided with CSGO developing this economy. And I've always been fascinated by that side of Valve, like the economy, like TF2, Dota, like the thinking behind all of that, like what goes on. And so I got into Valve at that time where they were developing this economy. And it was just a different way of thinking that was pivotal in this next chapter in my career that I was venturing towards. So while I was there at Valve, I came across this Kickstarter from this group of guys just doing this VR thing, and I'm like, wow, VR, because you know, VR has always been a part of sci-fi, and me being a big fan of sci-fi, it's like the holodeck, the Matrix. Wow, it's like that's really interesting. All the luminaries from the gaming industry were supporting it, and then Facebook bought Oculus, and I was like, oh man, that's really really intriguing now. And then my friend Kenneth Scott, actually, he connected me with Nate Mitchell, one of the founders of Oculus, and they brought me in to be a part of a group of artists, and we were essentially tasked to create the sort of first-party experiences for the Rift. So the cool thing about that was I got to see the birth of the first VR consumer product, right? Like with the Rift. I mean, VR's been around for such a long time, but to see the birth of the consumer version that everyone should hopefully be using at that point was amazing. And we worked on a lot of things, but this project I want to highlight because it was so fun for me to do. So it was Farlands. It was the game that it was included in the Rift. And I did some of this was the main character. This was painted by John Liberto, by the way, who's an amazing, amazing artist. So I did the main character, the Giffle. So I did the design for this one. I patterned it after succulent plants, so for the head, it's split into three. So when it's like angry or sad, it can kind of contract like a bud. And I just wanted to kind of be cute, kind of like How to Train Your Dragon. But we were going for a more Jim Henson's kind of vibe. What is this? The Wigwam, not the Naiad. It was designed by Gabo Garza, also an amazing artist. I mean, all the artists are amazing. So yeah, this one actually, I made a shape for the gullet to expand kind of like a frog. So it would do these sort of like weird sounds. I saw like a documentary, and it had these birds that kind of herniated their chest into like this big balloon-like bubble. So I did that for this one, and it was cool because I got to really put my expertise from film into sort of the real-time space, and in VR of all things, like to see this in front of you, like it's like you're really there with this creature, right? So just more creatures here. The stern is what we called it. Early on, before we even knew what the game was, we were just doing a lot of concepts. So these were some of the concepts I was doing. It was just a fun time. I mean, we were just all like, it was a big playground. And then until we figured out what the game was, and it was like all hands on deck trying to finish it, right? So parallel to me working with that team, there was another group in Oculus that was developing this VR sculpting app. Headed up, one of the founders was Lydia Choi, who is the product manager of Modeler now. But back then, we used to work at ILM. We even worked at War of the Worlds together. But she went to Oculus, started developing this VR sculpting app. And so I was like intrigued, because of course I'm a sculptor, and I was intrigued by it. So I picked it up a little bit, and these were some of my first kind of medium sculpts. And I always tell the story. I didn't like it. I was like, I put it back. Didn't touch it for 6 months, but because it didn't have like move or warp or any of those more hand-based way of manipulating the surface. But something at the back of my mind was like, Gio, there's something here, man. And I think it was the same itch that I felt when I was a student in the lab trying to figure out 3D. So that kicked back in, at this point in my career, which was great because it's always in us to kind of have that sort of fire light up again. And so I was like, man, there's something here. I was seeing a lot of really cool sort of like stylized stuff being done in medium by artists out there. So I had this goal in my head to push it so that it can show its use to other types of artists, like who may be into like sculpture, like figurative sculpture or film and stuff like that. So with that as my goal, I really just started to push myself to to come up with more story-based dioramas, because you're in VR now, right? You can be in the space of the story you're trying to tell. So words can't really convey how it is on a 2D screen like this, as big as it is, to be in here, in the headset, like put yourself beside that father sacrificing his dark stuff here, sacrificing his kid to the bonobo king. It feels like you're there in that scene, and along with those kids. But still, at this point, there was no move tool, so it was like, it was akin to working with whipped cream, as I like to call it, because it's like kind of like just you're pushing and pulling, and there's no tactility, right? So you're just there. Whereas with a move tool, you can actually have control. Then they started putting the move tool, and it was like all the effort that I put into learning it. Then they add the one thing that I really needed. It just made it so much better for me. So it now became sort of like, okay, the de facto tool I started to use, because from my teachings with Carlos, it's very form-based. I'm now able to kind of build these forms like I would in clay, like real clay, and start pushing and pulling them around. And so it offered me that control. So I was able to get a lot more precise and a lot more anatomical with my creations. This particular one, built it in Medium, exported it out in ZBrush, because ZBrush, it's just like working with those two. And sometimes I would just build something in ZBrush and back in Medium. I wanted to blur the lines, because I would always get these questions of like, well, is it better than ZBrush, or is Medium better than and it's like, at the end of the day, right, it's just a tool. And that's one thing I always want to push to people who are curious. It's like, you just use what's best for you. And in this case, thankfully for me, both are equally important. And so with this, it was sort of a synthesis of both of those apps. Using ZBrush for the more rhythmic refinements on the surface that you would not be able to get in Medium, and then Medium for the big, broader forms that you can kind of see in the round when you're in VR. This one was a reaction from a comment that said, oh yeah, but you can't really do details in Medium, right? Well, prove you wrong. So I did this, like put all the scales one by hand, and it was a very hypnotic exercise. It was sent to Gentle Giant. We did this for Monsterpalooza. So Gentle Giant printed this like big print of it and painted it there for Monsterpalooza. So Medium at this point was acquired by Adobe, and it made all the sense in the world for me to jump ship with the Medium team, because at this point in the game, I came from like not having any interest in Medium to like, oh my goodness, I was like going to shows, going to events, showing it off. It was just very much a part of my life, and so I just had to go to Adobe. And when I went to Adobe, our fearless leader, Kelly Townley, was back then setting up this group called Art and Development, and she wanted me to give me the task of trying to help define what the flavor and the look of art and dev was, and so I was thinking, okay, well, Substance is a part of Adobe, and Adobe has this very like a certain kind of color palette that are very bright and colorful. Substance 3D tends to be more like, grimy VFX games kind of thing, which I love. But being under Adobe, I wanted to like see what those two would look together, avoiding the dystopian, gritty, grimy stuff, but putting more like whimsical colors and maybe like this sort of magical printer, which I was very happy to be a part of in Art Direct here. So that was the sort of thinking I was giving myself getting into this new group. And again, it was like a new thing for me, kind of like, Valve. It was just like a welcome challenge that I just went in without questioning, just went straight through. And this one, I worked on this with Nikki Monteleone, who's here. Wanted to give Nikki a shout out here. worked on this for the release of Modeler's first splash screen. So a very cool landmark for Modeler, having us do the splash for it. This was for the beta that I did, the beta imagery for Modeler. And I was able to art direct this project that our group did. We're very proud of it. It was called End of Summer, and I got to work with an awesome artist by the name of Carol Cornos, who I hired as the character artist to design and work on the father, the daughter, the dog, and then the donkey. You can't really see the dog, but there's a dog at the back of the daughter there. But all the while, you know, I was still working with Modeler, pushing the more hard surface side of things, because I kind of was like, oh, I'm very comfortable with characters, but I want to see if this app, this SDF modeling app, was made to also handle hard surface, because back then I think there was some skepticism. So you know me, like when I hear skepticism, I'm like, well, let's see if you're wrong. So tried doing a car, and I use these things as a point where I can give feedback, because it's like maybe it's not really made to make a car, but by doing a car, I figured it opens up like a whole host of workflows that may have not been considered before, and such was the case, I feel, for these projects that I ended up doing that Modeler was not really designed for, right? But the beauty of like my position and all of our positions at Art and Development is we can experiment and use the app in very creative ways. So for this one, I've always wanted to be an animator as well. I used Modeler to do a stop motion test for on a whim. I've always been wanting to do something like Aardman or Leica. And then at this point, my team was moved into the Evangelism team. So we became visual development. And essentially our task is to create or help create and guide the visuals that the Evangelism team does, and also create these projects for shows like GDC, for events, for Max, IBC, and all that stuff. So we did this project called Rhonda for GDC, the one that just passed. So we really wanted to get this like diorama miniature feel. So really proud of this one, because Casimir Perez, who's an amazing artist, and myself, we worked on this like tirelessly for a compressed amount of time, and all done in Modeler for the modeling, and Kaz rendered this in Blender. So switching over to personal work, as I mentioned before, like my ritual of doing personal work throughout my career was constant. I mean, sometimes it would, like there'd be gaps maybe of years even of me not really being as ferocious with it, but I always tended to still keep up with it, especially with the medium stuff, like the work that I did for them also became my personal work. But I wanted to kind of just go through some of the works that I've done in the past, which will lead us to the more lecture-based stuff, because we can start talking about more forms and kind of sculptural concepts here. So I used to do a lot of human figures. Like I was very fascinated with anatomy and capturing, like dynamic poses and making sure the anatomy is correct and the names and the muscles and all that stuff. So this was, I think I was at that phase. I've slacked off since with that stuff. Like I can't tell you what the name of whatever muscle you point at me probably to name in this thing. But I also did, like quite a range of figurative stuff. But through it all, I think what I really want to focus on is the sort of naturalism or the naturalistic feel of flesh. If there's one thing to sum up my my practice. It's just naturalism and just the feeling of motion through staticness, I guess, if that's a word, right? So, I don't know if that is conveyed in some of these, but that's always at the back of my mind. Like when I do a face, just the flow of the forms for Tyrion right there. Especially personality, right? Like it's always sketchy. I try to just focus on the forms, and you'll notice I don't really focus much on pores and detail, because that's a very production-centric mindset, I feel, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. But I choose to kind of focus more on what I feel is the more important stuff for me, specific to me. I'm not saying it's important over everyone else's preference, right? But for me, it's to capture the forms of a character that define the character. And on top of that, add that whole naturalism that I was talking about. So I've always loved the face of this gentleman on the right there. It's from the movie Hidden Fortress, the Akira Kurosawa movie. So I've always wanted to sculpt him. So I was like, why not sculpt his partner as well? A lot of my pieces are very loose. I tend to kind of keep the clay marks on the surface. And before I was like, I would get these questions of like, why do you leave it there? Why don't you just smooth it out? Well, think of it as sort of when you draw in charcoal or something, like a very loose gestural sketch, right? You're leaving those action and rhythm lines there. Well, that's the equivalent of it in digital sculpture, leaving those marks that kind of lead your eye, hopefully, to the forms and kind of bring some sort of a movement to a static piece. Again, movement through a static piece. This was commissioned to me by Vincent van Dyke FX. He was wanting me to design and sculpt a full-blown gargoyle that he could print out for his studio. I think he did print it out. It's like really big, and he hung it somewhere. So maybe even bronzed it. I don't know. That would have been cool. I do a lot of like just studies that are just like grayscale, and so once in a while I actually start having the inkling of wanting to paint and render. I should do it more often. I don't do it enough, but this was one of the later projects that I've done with paint and render, and not just a screenshot from Modeler or ZBrush. I do a lot of freelance work for Tweeterhead for statues, and I call this my weekend work. Just kind of like zone out into weekend and start fleshing out these highly detailed sculptures for my art director, David Igo, who's, I don't know if he's listening in this live stream or he will, but an awesome dude. But yeah, we work together on these, and he gives me a lot of opportunities to come up with the designs based off of classic designs from these cartoons. And another checklist for me, because as a kid I've always loved watching Thundercats and He-Man. I owned the toys, so getting to work on our own rendition of these characters in a way that could possibly fit in a film, that was our directive with this, was just a fun time. I like to do weird stuff too, so you'll see the influence from the 80s stuff, the hardcore rated R stuff. I figured, I was debating whether to put this here, but it's a part of my portfolio, and so it's a part of me. I do weird, kind of gruesome stuff too. I won't linger on that too much. I like to push the form of the human body. Like I said before, I was into the study of anatomy and the accuracy of anatomy. I've kind of let go of that and just focused on the design of form. When you ask me to look at a muscular person or anything muscular, I don't see muscle names. I see a series of shapes that are interlocked and interconnected, similar to this. And then I use that as a way to come up with my own design of what the anatomy could be, humanesque or not, right? That for me is a lot more interesting than trying to portray something with utter accuracy on a medical kind of level, right? So this has been my practice, like strength and form, rhythm, and all that stuff, which leads us to sculpture philosophy and workflow. So let me just go take a sip of this water here and maybe take a 30-second sort of mini break here. Thank you. Sculpture philosophy and workflow. So I was thinking up of how to do this part of the demo. You know, I didn't want to just like sit up here and open up a 3D package and start, you know, sculpting something and talking it through. Before doing that, I wanted to kind of outline to you the ingredients or the toolkit, I should say, of what I use mentally whenever I approach something. So I wanted to lay that out so that there's context when we start getting into the 3D stuff. So yeah, these are, I mean, I have a lot of things I think about, but I think I've narrowed it down to abstract shapes, water balloons, hierarchy of forms, which are primary, secondary, and tertiary. So you'll all get what all these mean. So these all seem probably very random here. Let's start off with abstract shapes. What are abstract shapes? This is my own definition of it. So you're probably not going to see this in any dictionary, but it's specific to me, maybe. But they're natural forms that harmoniously intersect, creating beauty through chaos. Now, if someone goes to the grocery and sees an orange, they probably think, man, it's in season. That looks delicious. Well, when I look at an orange, I zoom in really up close and admire the interlocking shapes that you can find on the surface of that orange. There's beauty there. You know, when you really look at it, there's a design that is intricate and fascinating, right? Can you see the mouse here? All right, that's good. So you can see a series of just bigger shapes, smaller shapes. Maybe here this would be secondary shapes and your tertiary shapes over there, just how it interlocks and overlaps like seismic plates, just like pressing against each other, right? It was nature who designed this. So I look at clouds, trees, you know, when a dog looks at a tree bark, it probably thinks, wow, I could pee on that. Well, when I look at a tree bark, I see an inverted Y with different cross sections from hard to curved compound shapes where let's see what that is. I mean, it's subtle, but I'm seeing it there, right? Why did I put that there? This feels like this cross. So I'm really studying it. Even it's probably not even accurate. Maybe it's just a light. But there's just so much rhythm and cause and effect on just this alone and how that formed throughout the years. And that's a library of information I'm mentally storing in my head, unknowing sometimes. Maybe I'm just passing it by like a momentary admiration. It's like, oh, but it's in my head. The human back, right? It's, as it is, a muscular person's back is already abstract enough. But when the back flexes, there's a series of things happening there that are specific to that person, and those abstract shapes belong to that person. So there's a uniqueness to everyone's abstract shapes, right? And so I like to look at a lot, sounds weird, like I like to look at a lot of muscular backs flexing, but I do. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it's everywhere, right? Is the point, not just muscular backs. So yeah, if you see driving down here in LA, you see a tree trunk with a chunk kind of ripped out of it. You probably think that's Gio, just taking souvenirs of abstract forms wherever he goes. Water balloons. What are water balloons? They're essentially dynamic shapes that fluidly adapt under the influence of gravity, stretch, and tension. Let's talk about the anatomy of a water balloon. So, if you imagine, if you will, a rubber casing with water inside, obviously, with two flaps on each end. In this case, it's sort of like stretched in sort of a neutral way and pinned. In which case, if you can imagine, what is the fluid doing inside of the water balloon in this case, right? How does it settle? Well, my guess would be it would be sort of, since it's in a neutral state, the apex or the belly would be in the center. Now, what happens if you start, playing around with different scenarios for this water balloon, like the first one, right? So this is how I think about forms. And whenever I think about like shapes and all that stuff, I always it depends, like if it's a hard, bony shape, maybe not, but like organic shapes, I try to think of the fluid inside. And how does gravity affect that fluid? So in the case of the first one, the head pinned and the tail unpinned, you would expect the fluid inside to settle in that way where it's just gathering in sort of this tapered way. The one in the middle, fluid will settle in a certain way. And so when I'm, the one on the last, actually, I should have like stretched that into a tighter ellipse, because I was trying to convey, okay, like the stretch, what does that look like when you're really pulling both ends? And you get into scenarios where, okay, well, what if the forms, these water balloons are like multiple water balloons pressed and interacting in ways that are just like very, very unique to the character. How does the fluid inside work? Or how does the fluid inside affect that water balloon? Where does the belly settle? And thinking about that, it gives the form a lot of gravity and weight, right? And so when I told this concept to Anton Mikolov, who works in the Modeler team, he did this primitive, which I'm calling the water balloon. So for Modeler in VR, it's a very, it's such a cool thing to play around with when you're just kind of like pulling these forms and then laying them down and then using the warp tool to really start defining the belly, the tail, the tension, and then merging it and then putting skin on top of all that stuff. And lastly, hierarchy of forms. So I'm going to use this creature, this swamp creature, Swampy, as my example. So starting off with primary forms, essentially they're, I'll just loosely read from what I have there. Essentially forms that are the foundation of all the other shapes are built on. So it's, my thinking of primary forms, and it's different per artist, like used to be, I would consider primary forms to be like, if I were to break this down, it would just be like a sphere and a sphere, like just very way simplified. But for me, my definition has now become sort of whatever traits or structural elements that define a character. Like when you do a squint test from a person and you can kind of see what they look like because of their primary shapes. That's what I put in there. So they establish the structure, readability, and proportions as well of a character or design. And they essentially set the stage for the rest of the forms, secondary and tertiary. And so this is just how I would, I'm a very shapes-based modeler, I guess. So Modeler has been perfect for me because I could just use primitives to just quickly block those shapes in versus, there's also a side of me that's like, I can just model from a sphere and pushing and pulling it out, but this is sort of like how I really think and deconstruct things anyway as shapes, so it's been perfect for me in this sense. So let me play the video again. So I'm just here in Modeler just kind of duplicating the primary forms and creating the secondaries because I'm lazy and I don't want to like create new layers over and over again. So I'm just quickly copying what's there and kind of just warping it in place. Let me just take a sip of water here, sorry. Tertiary shapes. What are tertiary shapes? A lot of people mistake tertiary forms or shapes as surface detail. You know, when I see a lot of character artists speak on tertiary forms, they're actually talking about surface detail, like pores or like hyper noise and stuff like that. Well, in my opinion, you know, again, it's different from different artists, right? For me, tertiary forms define the surface of the character in terms of like, what type of skin is it? If it's sort of say like an older skin, you know, it's a little flappier maybe, so those tertiary shapes, the way those forms kind of interact, the water inside the water balloon may be a little heavier, right? Like there's more gravity affecting those forms because it's just looser. So this is just the phase of the process where I'm thinking about that, the tertiary forms phase. While these forms provide essential visual interest, now here's the key part of tertiary shapes. It is crucial to apply them thoughtfully. I've come into instances on my own that I've lovingly put all the primaries and secondaries, you know, like I'm just so happy with it. I get into tertiary forms phase and it's just all obliterated because I get so happy, you know, like I just zoom in and lose sight of like the bigger picture. So I always try to zoom out and just kind of use these tertiary forms to accent what is there, not to overpower, right? That is a key thing to remember. You're using these smaller details to accent the bigger forms. Secondary shapes should accent primaries. Tertiary shapes should accent secondaries. So that's how I think of things. You know, say for this one, just showing how I would do tertiaries in Modeler, I would select all my secondaries, smooth them out together into sort of a more organic shape, you know, setting it up for the tertiary details using the build-up tool. And it's really fast in VR here. And so I'm starting to kind of graft the areas where there could be sort of like radiating wrinkles, and then, you know, fast forward, obviously. I'm not that fast. I start putting in, it's sort of a rinse and repeat process. I would put in these forms, merge it, smooth it, and then put it again. But again, even in this phase, I'm still thinking of water balloons. How do these small, tiny details press up on each other? Because if you zoom in on an orange, right, it's like the orange example, like it's still forms. It's still a series of beautiful forms. So in practice, so I get this question a lot, like, well, Gio, that seems pretty limiting. Like, you have to, you know, think of things in such a compartmentalized way. Well, no, these are concepts I'm using to break down the thinking behind each part of the process. When I'm actually building something, it all overlaps, right? Because you're now dealing with like trying to catch up with your artistic ideas and creative flow. So, you know, for primary forms, actually, I still kind of am a bit methodical about it. Like, say, if I'm going to do this character in Modeler, we have this new non-destructive primitives where you can just like adjust those primaries non-destructively, and then merge them together, and then, you know, start putting water balloons for, you know, making sure that the structure is in place before putting those top elements to really give it that sense of hierarchy. So, I mean, this is essentially how I would, you know, how you would see me create something, not like, okay, primary shapes first and then secondaries. It just all overlaps, but it's just me showing you what each of those phases look like in my head, I guess. I mean, we don't have to like look at all of this stuff here. So, in-app demos. All right. Let's see what we have here. So, have Modeler here. So it's just weird to kind of suddenly get into a 3D app, and I'm like, oh, how do I do this again? It's like talking through PowerPoint. Does anyone want to take a quick break? I know that's like a lot. Or any questions before we get into sort of this point? Or just keep going, save the questions for later? Yeah? All right. Okay, so I did this character, I'm calling it the, what is it? Oh, the Red Fury. It was supposed to be like this red orc. I had in my head like, I want to do an orc. So I was like inspired by the new Rings of Power trailer. So I'm like, I'm gonna try and do an orc for my Nomon talk. It's supposed to be red, and I wanted to kind of like get a sense of it being more of, I don't want to do the sort of typical orc. I wanted to kind of add a little bit more something to it, so I figured it could be red. It could be this like feared, in my head, right? I mean, obviously, what you're seeing is this sort of vanilla version of it, but yeah. So I did this for the demo, but I also did a breakdown of how you would possibly look at the primaries. So in Modeler, let me just adjust the field of view so it's a little flatter, and get rid of that ground plane for now. Or that grid. So as you can hopefully see, this obviously, where's the outliner? Our primary shape here. Like what I was mentioning earlier, where I used to be a lot more broader with how I would apply the primary shapes. What I would do now is what I would consider primary shapes. Because before I would consider, honestly, these to be secondary shapes, like the brow and the ridge. But for me, my thinking now is like, okay, what are the main shapes that define, the squint test? Like if I were to squint or zoom out, that zygomatic bone, that highlight, the depth, that is what I want to preserve from secondary to tertiary. Right, and I'm hoping that I was successful, but that is essentially always my goal. Is whenever I'm in this stage, I always try not to overpower the smaller forms the bigger forms with the smaller forms. So if we're looking at the pectoralis muscle here, or the pectoralis primary form, when I'm starting to break that down into the different secondary shapes, I'm always trying to kind of zoom out and going, maybe that's too separated, so smooth that out a little bit. So let's work on this secondary shape there rather than like talking it through. Let's just start, once say I'm happy with the secondary shapes, let's start combining things. I'll just combine the chest for now, since we don't really have much time. Well, we'll have 1 hour. It's been 1 hour, and then we'll save time for Q&A. So merge. All right, so I just merged all those shapes. And what's great about the shape-based approach for me is these all look pretty geometric and toy-like, but once I start smoothing them, let's jack up the smoothing. You start getting a good sense of skin. Oh, sorry. And when I'm smoothing, I'm being very selective. I want to retain some of the contrasty areas, right? So I'm being very tactical here. I'm not just gonna when I think of a smooth tool, I think of like a heat gun, when you're like heat gunning clay to really tame the surface. I'm selectively heat gunning the areas, right? Because like say this line used to be a very contrasty line and consistent line. Maybe I'll really smooth the heck out of that area and leave these 2 pinch points. Because, again, when we think of this as a water balloon, head and tail, or vice versa, I don't know which is which at this point, what it's pulling, right? So it's connected to the clavicle and the underneath of this deltoid muscle, there's a pull there connected to the bone, right? So there's a stretch. Well, what is that apex going to look like? What is that belly going to look like? It ain't going to look bulgy like this, because that tells me that it's not, there's no pull there when there should be. So I'm flattening it, right? So this is I'm just talking through what's in my head right now. I'm flattening it so it's almost flat to convey that pull, but leaving those 2 pinch points to convey the tension. And then maybe I'm like, I'm still not, okay, let's get back to that later. And so I'm kind of like doing the same thing here. Just sometimes I would just, oops, keep hitting that for some reason. Just kind of just making sure that it all kind of feels organic. So, I mean, you know, hopefully it's looking like like skin, right? So let's move on to. So essentially, that's what I did to Mr. Tertiary shape here. So let's jump Martha Stewart style on tertiary shapes. After the commercial break, with me drinking, taking a sip here. All right, so pretend we just combined all of these shapes. And it's not, I mean, I wouldn't call this done. It's sort of rinse and not even close to being done, because we're gonna go to ZBrush on this fella here. But even in the modeler side of things, we're not done yet. You know, now that I've smoothened things, I'm like, okay, well, I'm always assessing the form, right? And I feel like this is just good practice, where my workflow is essentially say, okay, I'm going to add let's add a form, let's say here. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to, because I want to amp up the pec, and especially how the 1, 2, 3, 4, these 4 forms are butting up against each other. I want to amp that up a little bit. So created a new layer, applied that, and I'm going to go to my, actually, hold on. I did not create a new layer, sorry. Make a symmetry. Okay. No, that is not a giant nipple. All right, so I'm going to create a form there. Let's say, you know, say there. And let's go to our warp tool. Oops, sorry. Selecting that layer. So I'm actually using this. Maybe too strong on my warp here. Using this to really accentuate, and I'm always rotating. I never just work on one view, right? I think it's good practice to, every time I make a mark, like say I'm gonna pull this, because I want this looking like it's underneath form A, B, and C, right? I'm always assessing and looking at the silhouette, making sure that all those cross sections are clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this and just kind of create, again, because I'm lazy, I don't want to create a new layer. I'm just going to work with what's there. And you know, that's going to be one of our new forms here. And I'm going to duplicate this again. That's going to be our top form. It's always like harder when there's like a demo for some reason. Like at home, this is like easy. I chose a hard area. Anyway, pretend that this is yeah, okay, now we're getting it. So I created new shapes for the area that I really want to start defining. Because with these new shapes, non-destructively, I can start adding some design elements to this, right? Like, okay, so this could probably puff out a little bit more because I'm thinking, you know, this is pressed up against, you know, the pectoralis minor, I believe, if I have my anatomy down pat. And then this one would be over this. So I'm actually designing it because I'm still in form-based land right here. My goal is before I could take it to ZBrush, I want all these as strong as they can be. So, you know, pretend that's, you know, I'm nowhere near happy with it, but pretend that's acceptable. Merge it, and then rinse and repeat. Smooth it out. Or add, you know, the crease tool to really amp it up a little bit more. But yeah, see, that's sort of what I was trying to convey is now it's more defined, right? Versus before, it was sort of like, eh. It was like ill-defined. It was almost like all sharing the same plane. So I'm reestablishing sort of that hierarchy again, like what is underneath, what is on top, what is pushing what. So it's at this point usually where I'm like, okay, I'm fairly happy with the forms, and so, you know, let's take it to ZBrush to really add the, we'll switch gears to like more rhythm and movement to how to kind of like fuse all these forms together so it just sounds artsy-fartsy, so it sings, you know. So let's see, let's go to ZBrush. So in ZBrush, hold on, let me take a sip of water again. Oh, I think I lost my, oh, there it is. Yeah. So ZBrush. So there's a set of workflow things I want to touch on, I think, before we get into this. And I want to sort of highlight my settings, I guess, that I use. I only honestly use a handful of tools in a lot of 3D apps, and ZBrush, you know, like there's all these brushes, but for me, it's clay buildup, damn standard. Ah, I forgot to bring the Gio brush that Pablo made, which is, I mean, I'm not, you know, using it out of ego. It's actually like very awesome brush because it is creating these water balloon-esque forms that I really love. But damn standard has been sort of like, you know, the standard in a lot of things. So let's use that. So when I'm in ZBrush, what I like to do is really jack down the intensity, like, of my clay buildup, right? So, and I go really, really low because, you know, really holding it true to its name, buildup. I want to, well, maybe that's too low. Am I even on the right layer? Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's perfect. I want to hold it to its name, buildup, you know, give me the control of the buildup. So it's on a really low setting. Same with damn standard. With damn standard, I tend to have a bigger radius because what that does, instead of, and I don't know, maybe people use damn standard for more of a like a detailing tool like this, but for me, it's a beautiful tool. Oops. to create forms with, because with a big radius, I'm actually just, I'm able to, like, say if I were to subdivide this primary shape, I'm able to just, like, you know, do it in a very naturalistic manner like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, you know, show you how to take it from this to like a very organic and finished model, I hope. Starting off with clay buildup. And at this point I'm like, you know, there's really nothing to specifically highlight except that I just go with the flow, really. Like, I remember someone asked me before, like, what are you thinking when you're in this stage, Gio? I'm like, I think when you think, that breaks the process. I'm just kind of going, I've already done the work to define the roadmap, right? With the bigger shapes, I'm just following what I had done and just using that as sort of like the way in which I'll do these strokes, or where, you know, I'm kind of like, okay, these maybe got a bit too mechanical, I'm looking. So I wanna convey that there's stretch of skin there. So I bet whoever was sitting beside me at work in my time at film was so annoyed, because you would just hear this tapping sound on my tablet, like tack, 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 because I'm like I could get really intense with these strokes. I'm just like, with a big clay buildup, I'm just like, and then smoothing. I'm getting confused with Modeler shortcuts now with my ZBrush, so I'm kind of like combining things in a way that's confusing. Okay. So but again, you know, I'm still very aware, trying to be aware at least of, like, again, respecting the primary and secondary shapes, right? So for this character, the Red Fury, I wanted to kind of convey that there's this, and I think I saw it in some chimpanzees, or maybe a Geldala, like a younger Geldala, the ones that can really lift their upper lip and reveal their gums. Really scary but beautiful creatures. But they have this this form. It's almost like a cable of flesh pinned. So again, if I imagine it as a water balloon, right? Where is it pinned? Okay, it's pinned here and underneath this maw. So this maw is a spheroid, half of it. So this water balloon, with that in mind, right? Like, okay, where I'm just defining the cross sections here. I want to really convey that pull. So if it's pinned here and there's tension here, this will be straight, really. So I look at the cross section, or not the cross section, the profile, right? Well, that looks a little funky because it's pretty wobbly. So let's go to the Move tool. Water balloon stretch. Okay, how does that look? So there would be probably a slight bow, right? And then like a bow and tension. And then variance in terms of the thickness as well. Like maybe this is amped up. This is deeper because that's like the pull is really, you know, just amping up that flesh, the depth of it. And then let's go with a damp standard here and start maybe doing. But see, I don't want to do this because it's two parallel forms. So let's make it a little bit more interesting, right? Maybe it goes this way, and then this way. So I'm always trying to think of ways to really add interest and avoiding something that looks mechanical, which are parallel forms. You want to kind of just vary it up a bit. And then from there, hit it up with a clay buildup. And what I tend to do is just kind of do this like thin strand here, and then just kind of fade it off. Like it's, you know, if you can imagine tension and spread, like if I were to draw it, right? It's spreading this way. And that, I think that's how I define the way in which I do my strokes, is with, again, the important roadmaps already in place. If you think of it as highways, right? Main highways, and the exits kind of veer off into sort of smaller areas. What I'm doing right now is sort of that part of it. Like I'm veering off from the main highway and into sort of like the exits. So these things, the pathways that really add that movement and geography to the creature or character, whatever it is. Just want to be cognizant of time here. All right, I'm going to stop at what is it? 8:35-ish, and then I could do demos upon request, or if you have any questions, but I'll keep going at this until about 8:35 or so. So using the DAM standard to really amp up that water balloon, and maybe even masking this.
Hey Gio, quick question. When you take it from Modeler into ZBrush, do you do any die meshing or recomposing?
Yes, in fact, I had done that already for this one to save you all some time. What I did was I Z-remeshed it and projected it onto the modeler raw file. Yeah. So a little bit on detailing. Let's touch on that. Let's go on this other version. Okay, so I had already done sort of a... So with all that in place, like all the, tertiaries, since why not, let's give him some pores and details. And it's just following the same sort of idea, right? Like working with the forms and now the rhythm and flow that I've established with a clay buildup marks. Because that is what I really love about the clay buildup here, and not to sound too much of a geek here, but it was genius for them, for Pixelogic. I'll say Pixelogic because clay buildup was done during the Pixelogic time frame. The fact that they had this brush that was this very stark square, like it's a square, like it's a square relief without any fall off, and that ended up, for me at least, being the best possible brush, because when you smooth out these marks, they end up being like skin right there, right? Like it just becomes this organic flow that it just created, it always creates like ideas for me. Like say, oh man, okay, there's some cool stuff we could do here. Kind of there's a pinch there that I accidentally created, and then I'll hit it up again with a clay buildup, maybe like the orange peel example, right? But again, making sure that sometimes when I do this, I'm like, I zoom out, it's too overbearing. So what's great, a great technique is go to your lowest subdivisional hierarchy with a low smooth intensity. Just kind of tap that back into sort of a tamer surface, and go back up and then it kind of almost like brings back out the primaries or the secondaries. So you're not getting too much of the wobbly surfaces. So getting into detail with this one, let's focus on this area right here. Now that I have the, like I said, the build-up and the rhythm marks and all that artsy-fartsy stuff, we'll take the damn standard. And I'm always like, okay, well, where should I start the detail, right? And I kind of just, it's funny because I just kind of like let my hands hover, okay, almost like tracing the marks that I've laid down, and okay, like maybe it's kind of going here. And when I talked about the highways and the exits, right, these are sort of the exits, sort of I'm putting on. Kind of just, again, trying to avoid this type of vibe, but rather go with the flow, man. Like if there's one thing to take away from this talk, just go with the flow. It's just like, the flow is defining me to go here. And then it kind of spreads this way. I mean, let's just work on this part here because there's too much coverage here. So what I would do there then is to get the clay buildup brush and start adding even, I would call these like mini water balloons, right? Like just, okay, let's focus on this area. And I know it sounds tedious, but what can I tell you, it is. It's my jam. I mean, it may not be yours, You're like, just use an alpha map, whatever. But again, it's kind of like if you want to take the form idea further, this is what you would do, right? Because this is still working with form, and I have utmost control from primary to tertiary to secondary, or secondary to tertiary. And so I'm able to kind of just start defining the nature of what this skin is, because I'm like, okay, I'm also thinking, okay, this character maybe a little bit on the older side of things, side of life, has seen a lot, killed a lot, sun damage, So I'm taking that into consideration too in terms of how what the skin could possibly be. And then on top of that, we could start, doing some more organic breakup. Maybe not that one. Where's that one I really love? Oh, this. With a low. I mean, I'm working with a low resolution. Obviously, it'd be better if it was high resolution, but kind of adding that chaos.
So, Gio, while you're working through this, I'm going to go ahead and take some questions here. I have a question for you first. When you're working on this, what part is the orange and what part is the tree?
What part is the what?
What part is the orange and what part is the tree?
Oh, okay. Well, the orange is definitely, hold on, I just, see what I did there? It's just made it too noisy, so I'm undoing that. So the orange would be, that's a new philosophy. What part of is the orange and what part is the tree? I like that. This would be the orange, right? And then the tree. I mean, the tree I think would be this, because it's an idea. I took that as an idea, as a form, not necessarily to the scale of the tree. So, but I would consider that form that I took from that example to be a secondary shape, which I mean, that's the thing. It kind of, it's a little. It depends on the area, right? Because these are all information I'm taking in, and our ideas. So you can't really, I guess, ask that question: what is the tree and what is the orange? Because they then become sort of design ideas. I mean, that tree idea could make its way to the design of this, right? All the way to the design of this, which is a smaller form than what we were highlighting with a tree. So if you think of it more as, just to keep it simple, it's just working with shapes that are interesting, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. I know that's sort of like a cop-out answer to it, but definitely this would be the orange, right? I mean, that was, I mean, the vibe of what I was studying or looking at with the orange is kind of like bleeding into this, I'm finding. For the tree, that's a little harder because that's sort of like, it's a shape that you could apply to any type of form, may it be, well, maybe not quite primary, but who knows, maybe if you're doing sort of like an alien kind of a carapace or something, that could be the body for it. I could see that, right?
Okay, I have a question, or actually two. Do you have any book recommendations for anatomy or inspiration or any tips you picked up on? And then the second one, I'm not sure if you want to explain the first question while doing this, but would you be able to show how you would approach if you wanted to show the armpit? Since the arms are down, you can't see it, how you would be able to show that. Thanks.
Oh, okay. So first question, I'll repeat it. If I could suggest any type of books on anatomy, and as well as from artists, is that correct? I really love Elliot Goldfinger. That seems to be like a good standard for, at least back in the days when I was at ILM, it's this muscular, maybe that's why I have a fascination with like muscular backs, like in a lot of my work. It's the cover is a photo of a muscular back. That's a really good one because it actually shows you, the photo, and then beside it, the sort of diagram of the muscle drawn in a way that is very simple and not shaded, so it kind of becomes more clear. I've always loved George Bridgman's books and George Bridgman's teachings in general because it's very shape-based. Like George Bridgman breaks down the human body as sort of a series of pulleys and mechanical parts that are so easily understandable. Sorry, let me just take a sip here. Michael Hampton, I believe that's the name. I follow so many on Instagram. Michael Hampton, I believe, is one of those artists, and he's sort of like Bridgman, but sort of a little bit more anatomical. Adds a little bit more like the muscular shapes versus Bridgman, I think, was a little bit too abstractified. Like, the arm is a pulley with a pulley system and all that stuff. Like Michael Hampton has the feel of Bridgman, but has that sort of more an anatomy slant that makes it a lot more understandable. Oh gosh, there's so many. But I would start definitely with those two, like Elliot Goldfinger, Michael Hampton, 3, and George Bridgman for me. And I'm sure there are others now who are, I see a lot of accounts popping up on Instagram. And the second part, you wanted to see how I would deal with where'd he go? Deal with the armpit. We're out of luck here because this is meant to be a sculpture. So, it's not set up for that. The SDF is already based, or kind of welded itself. So unfortunately, I can't show that. But, if I were to build this in production, it would just be an A pose, right? And you kind of just deal with it there. I tend to not do that stuff anymore, production-driven stuff, so I don't really care much about what's not seen because it's not going to be animated. Like, I may get into that world again, but sorry about that. Sorry.
I have a question. How important is speed when you're working or like balancing, like, how fast do you work when you have to like get to the high achieving result, or do you just make it meshy but more creative, or do you just like focus on technical skills like I have to get this anatomy right?
So the question is, how fast do I go when I work? Do I worry about, I guess,
Technical or like
technical, yeah.
or expressions.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Do I worry about the technical construction of my models? And the answer to that is no. But if I'm in a production, then hell yes, because that's what I'm being paid for. But for the most part, what I'm showing you with this one is something that I would say do for my own personal practice. And that's the thing, I think, throughout the years, I've tried to kind of pull myself away from the production thinking, because I feel that has, I don't want to say stifled, because that sounds too harsh. I mean, it does. I mean, I'll just be upfront, like, because I think production artists, the work that we do in production is in service of a project or a vision, that's not your own. And so what you're doing for that production is highly focused, and it has nothing to do with you being an artist, right? And the stuff, and the, I think, unfortunate thing that has happened that I have seen in some of the 3D community is they put too much weight on production stuff in their own personal work. So if someone does this beautiful sculpture, you'd sometimes see, yeah, but what does the UV look like, or what does the topology look like? Like, who cares? It's someone's artwork, and we are so. And I say this from experience because that's how I used to think, right? I would always be judgy, like, the UVs are probably, or not UVs, but like say the topology is probably not, blah blah. But at the end of the day, what I'm putting more weight on is the practice and the all the things I've mentioned, the ingredients, the toolkit, all that has nothing to do with production, but has everything to do with your growth as an artist. When you put production in that mix, that can weigh things down. And I get the value of putting production in your portfolio. Trust me, I get that. So there almost has to be two halves to your brain when it comes to that and your portfolio, right? Like, because you do have to show that you are proficient in UVs, topology, and all that stuff. But as an artist, the soul of an artist, that is so different from what you should focus on. And just, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to kind of go on a tangent, but that's my long-winded answer on that. Yeah.
Hi, Joe.
Yeah.
So my question is, even with applying your theory, you may not be satisfied with the forms overall. You may not be satisfied with how all the forms interact with each other. How should the forms look to give you the satisfaction of a finished work?
I'm never satisfied. When I look at my work, just like, it's always oh man, I did really good that night, so I'm gonna call it a night. I wake up and, it sucks. Or, I'm really happy with something that I've done, and then I post it. I'm like, why did I post it? It sucks. So I'm my own worst critic. Like, even right now, I'm like, why am I even showing this? Like, the forms are so, because I have such a standard for myself that I try to achieve that I think, like, I'll never achieve it. And I think that's fine. Like, it's a healthy kind of self-assessment. And I think what I've learned to do throughout the years, especially as I've gotten older, is to be okay with like not. I'm proud of my progress, but I'll never be happy enough to kind of say that any work that I've done is like, oh yeah, I'm happy with all the forms there. Maybe some parts of it, like, wow, yeah, like I really pulled that off, that one little pimple area or something. But no, I think that's just all of us as artists, right? We're like our worst judges or something. So.
When you're working in VR, do your arms ever get tired?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my technique to that is I call it T-Rex arms. So like, because when you're doing this, there's a lot of fatigue, right? You're like, so T-Rex arms, and I scale the sculpture up. And it's great, because it's almost like you're just kind of just there with like floppy arms just working. And then, you know, mix that up with like more broader, like you're dancing, kind of, yeah. So yeah, scaling the sculpture so that you're not like kind of hyper, you know, kind of doing these hyper frequency movements, but you're doing these sort of like more controlled movements. And then when your arms get tired, you're kind of just like doing this. So I mean, I've been able to go last in VR for like 8 hours. I wouldn't suggest it for like long periods, but yeah. So, anything else?
Hi. At what point in your workflow do you break symmetry?
Oh, at what point? So taking the, actually I could just, hold on. Sorry, let's go. So for these characters, the statues that I had done, these things. So breaking symmetry, like I think for Panthro here, took it to like secondary stage, total A pose, built the primary, secondary, and then I started posing him from there, because I wanted to make sure like the proportions and masses and all the features were feeling good, and then I posed them. Because since these were going to be 3D printed out, and I, you know, in my head they're like sculptures, I want to kind of get that feel of asymmetric errors. Like, you know, if you put the mirror test to it, it's like one side is like lopsided. But I wanted to kind of go through that struggle of like really just making sure that everything's like working symmetrically, even though I have the symmetry off. That's for these statues. For something like, say, film, or for also for my personal pieces, like sometimes I would just do something totally asymmetrical. Like I would just take, you know, start off with a bunch of primitives, just do a pose, and then just sculpt from there. And I always say that that is a good practice because it forces you to really confront that very icky and easy feeling of like discomfort, of like, this is hard, this is like, you know. Anytime I have the opportunity to do that, and that's sculpting asymmetrically, because that's hard as heck, I do it. For something like production, though, I stay on symmetry for as long as I can, because that is like, you know, you're under a deadline. You know, I'm not gonna be all artistic and, you know, hoity-toity about my work. I'm gonna stay on symmetry, and then the last moment I'll just kind of like, you know, do the breakups. So yeah, so personal work, I would say I stay off symmetry quicker, like say secondary stage, or sometimes even like from the get-go. Production, I'm gonna stay on symmetry forever. No, not forever. You're like, all of Gio's works in film is like all symmetrical, man. No, yeah, so that's my answer.
Hey Gio.
Yeah.
I really loved hearing about how your career parallels the developments in art technology, and how you've been so adaptable and you adopt the technologies when they come, or when these opportunities come for you, where, you know, you're the one that has to learn the technologies. I'm curious, how are you using AI?
Have I
at
used
all?
AI?
Yeah, and if you don't use it a lot right now, how do you see yourself using AI in the future?
Okay. I expected this question. Okay. So I'm the type of artist, I guess, that is very hands-on and obsessive. I mean, as I've shown here, I think, like, I want to put my own scales. I don't even outside of AI, right? I don't like using alphas. I'm like there putting the scales by hand. So I think I'm just too much of a control freak to let prompts do anything for me. Like even with cameras, right? Like I don't really like digital. Like I used to have like film cameras, and I'm more drawn to anything tactile and human-made. It's just the spirit and the soul of creating with your hands that is just, for me, that's the type of work I gravitate to, and that's the work that I always want to celebrate, right? Now, granted, I know that, the climate is now sort of shifting and all that stuff, so how do I use AI? Will I use AI? I honestly can't tell you, because one thing I've learned is never say never, but for me, what I'll always hold on to and celebrate is the works done by hand, because that's me. That's like how I got to where I am, right? From learning 3D back in Canada. That's like, it's hard for me to see myself just letting go of a lot of this to the machine. I mean, even though it is a machine. I mean, it's like we're working with computers, but like I still want to hold on to whatever sense of kind of tactility and influence that I have straight from my head onto the screen as much as I can. So.
Hello. So first of all, I would say I'm a big fan of your work. Pirates of the Caribbean was my childhood, and the shark
What was
guy.
your
The Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, okay.
The shark guy was left like a genuine impression on me. And
Oh,
I'm like,
okay.
oh shit, he's back on screen.
Smiling, yeah.
Yeah. So my question would be, coming from a Noman student who is entering my demo reel, right?
Mm-hmm.
To talk about portfolio and trying to get things out now are matter. Like this is the stage, right? The first stage was practice and taking as many classes, being a sponge, soaking it all in, and now it's time to like do the product, right? So what would you say to someone who is struggling, still struggling with the overall shapes and the skill set that it requires to kind of have this not innate knowledge, but just something in the back of your head to keep you on a schedule, right? To make sure you get the primary, secondary, tertiary, all of that done. Then you have all the details, and it looks not perfect, but the way that you want it to be, right? So when you have 10 weeks or 3 months or whatever it is, would you like hypothetically as a student, like entering your demo reel, would you rather spend more and more time practicing so you can finally be like, yes, I got it? Or would you rather be kind of stuck in this stage where things can be better and you are not, you know that if you put enough effort and time into it, it will work out, but you just realistically do not have the time and you need to carry on with that said project, right? Because you can't just submit a really good like statue, you'll also have to do some sort of look dev or designing it, and having to do like alphas over doing it by hand, right? So what would you tell a student like that?
Wow, that's a really good but tough question. My gut says, all the stuff that I'm telling, because these concepts, it's not like, and go and learn it. It took me such a long time to learn this, and I'm still learning. It's not something that you can force someone to just, okay, now I heard Gio talk about this, I'm gonna try and implement it. Even for me, it took a long time. And even then, like, this is one way of thinking about the work and approaching it. There are many different ways And me, I'm wired to kind of think of it this way, but maybe you or someone is wired in a more different way, and that is up to you to realize what the thing that really works for you is. Because maybe the forms way is like really putting a, what is it, a round circle in a square hole or something. So it's up to you to kind of decide for yourself if what you could take from this, if any. And that is, I think, the role of someone speaking here is all we do. We shouldn't say you should do this, this, and this. Take what you can. So saying that, if you have I don't know how many weeks? 10 weeks. Do what you can to finish it. Do not, I mean, I would say like the practice and all that stuff, that's a lifetime, right? So do what you can to finish it in a way that would get you the grades and all that stuff. And this stuff, you learn better when you're kind of doing it in the comfort of your own time, right? If you're under pressure to learn something that you may or may not resonate with, then that may be more of it may impede you more than give you progress. So I just want to be careful about that in your case is, you're kind of being hit with many different theories and concepts and all that stuff. But I think it's up to you to kind of look at your roadmap. Like, I have 10 weeks to do this. What is the one thing I'm really interested in and I'm really strong at right now, and play off of that. And maybe that becomes like, oh, Gio was talking about this, I'll try this. But don't kind of go, I'm going to practice, kind of set aside for practice, because that will eat up your time. So did that make sense? Yeah.
No, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. But that's a hard question, but it's a good one, so.
Okay, Gio, I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
I was talking earlier about how this is kind of a somber experience for me, because this is going to be one of our final live streams here at this stage. But the silver lining of everything right now is we're going to be moving to what I think is a beautiful new campus in NoHo West. So I think what everyone's wondering is, will you be visiting us at the new campus?
That's a question for Mr. Alex Alvarez.
Oh, okay.
Not me. That's not up for me. I'm gonna be like, yeah, so I'm gonna be in the new campus.
I think you're allowed. I'm gonna go ahead and say that you'll be allowed to come and visit us once it's all set and ready.
No one unfriended me on Instagram. My demo was and all that. Yeah.
Well, while we try and convince Gio that he's perfectly welcome at all Gnomon stuff, we want to welcome you to join us digitally and here right now for thanking him for being here and giving us that amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Gio.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if you want to keep up to date with what Gio is doing on a day-to-day basis, they can follow you on your socials, right?
Yeah, I'm socials. And feel free to ask any other questions, and even after, like, I'll be outside. I'm here to just really, I want to help anyone, any students with any questions, and Instagram, just message me. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. If you have any questions for what Gnomon can do for you, go ahead and visit us at gnomon.edu. If you're curious about the new campus, we also have some beautiful renders there as well. You can follow us at gnomon_school. And until next time, we'll see you. Thank you all so much, everyone.